everybody wants to stop posting our documents and put them online. But actually, people expect them online now. It's not a case of, because they want cheap rates, because clients want a digital experience.
So firstly, welcome Michael James, the Director for Digital and Consulting from Altus Consulting. So thanks very much for agreeing to join our podcast. As I think I've said to you before, Michael, this is a series we've called A Sense of Identity. And the idea is to try and give people a bit of a flavour of the people in the industry. I mean, you're incredibly well networked. Everyone seems to know you, by the way. When I ask around, so yeah, in a good way. I've not come across the bad bits just yet, but I think it's certainly from my perspective, it'd be interesting, and I hope for others when they listen to this to just understand a bit more about Altus. I mean, as a backdrop, when I started doing a bit of digging, and obviously a number of your colleagues I've known for quite some time, Kevin and Ben and Kat, etc. What's really interesting, as far as amongst lots of other stuff, is that you publish some incredible stats on your site. 16 of the top 20 UK FS firms are consulting clients of yours. That's quite, some credentials. Yeah. I think you've recently been recognised by the FT as, a leading consultant in the sector, which is again, a hell of a thing to accreditation to. It's just, that's
Altus, yeah.
All your personal work. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But as a business, and particularly with a title like Director of Digital and Consulting, I can imagine that has to cover a lot of disciplines. So I thought what might be interesting initially would be to sort of get a flavour from you about the scope of that, because digital covers so many different subjects these days. I know Altus have a platform they're there for helping, I think it's collectives and transfers and a broader scope. But at a consulting level, wow, the topics are just almost endless. AI, digital transformation, the governance and regulations. I wonder if you could share a little bit about, where are you seeing, the largest rump of interest at the moment, if you could say any one thing. I mean, it's consumer duty and digitisation. Give us a flavour of some of the things you're up to at the moment, if you can.
Yeah, no worries. So it's digital consulting rather than digital and consulting. I don't want to do Mev, my boss, being out of a job. At the moment, I guess the thing that we're seeing most of, the thing that's cropping up in every engagement, and we have something like 20 to 30 live engagements at any one time. So it's a fair range, not necessarily 30 clients, but certainly those engaged. And at the moment, what we're seeing is a lot of those have got data in them. It's somebody has got data in that engagement in some way, shape, or form, and clients they've got a huge stack of data. You can imagine. You mentioned the top 20 sort of FS companies that we're dealing with. You can imagine the amount of data they've built up over the years, and they want to leverage it. That's one of the biggest things that we're looking at right now.
It strikes me that we've got quite a lot of traditional and long-standing businesses in the FS industry that have been hell-bent on writing new business, but don't necessarily understand their clients and the characteristics of their clients. Is that something, therefore, you get quite into the depths of in terms of that data itself?
That's exactly it. That's exactly what everybody wants to use. They want to use the data to better understand their current clients and better understand their future clients. So get more out of what you've got and get more customers. I mean, that is the ultimate goal. But along the way, you want to use that to make their clients' journeys easier, better, more suited to them. Something that retail, in many ways, does a lot better than financial services. The likes of those supermarkets and like the Kingfisher Group or whatever. You buy a paintbrush and they'll sell you paint, or vice versa. In FS, it's a little harder to do that because we operate on a much slower cadence with our clients. The insurance clients, perhaps once a year or twice a year, so it's much harder to get that sort of unique experience. But it's not stopping everybody trying to do that. And certainly, organisations with backlogs of data for their clients have got that history that they can leverage and help make those journeys better.
So when you were talking there about that cadence, so that is a subject that I suspect is close to everybody's heart. I've read some really interesting books about the sort of the desire to become the place that people will go to for their financial information, and financial advisors obviously Hopefully do that in a big way. That's part of the appeal, I guess, being able to have a one-stop shop for those sorts of things. But are you seeing sort of the digital capabilities keep up with consumer desire in the same way? I mean, I remember all these phrases like robo advice, and now we're seeing AI and chat GBT. And are there particular areas that you are finding your customers are focusing on these days?
Yeah, so I think certainly in the advice and the wealth space, it's very much the move is now to hybrid advice, or at least that's what the kind of the goal that our clients are pushing towards. Where a client can start a D2C journey and buy something direct, and then perhaps shift at some point to get advice in a particular stage of that journey, or also start the advice journey and maybe finish off in a direct way. It's a bit of one of those utopia things that requires an awful lot more tech than people imagine it does. It's kind of like that old world of omni-channel. Remember, trying to get a similar journey across telephone, web, and advice is really difficult. As I'm sure you know, it's just quite difficult. And hybrid is also equally as difficult. And I think there's challenges then, because client expectations are really high from a digital perspective. You get a lot of clients that want to digitize to make things more efficient or cost less. And Post is a really good example. Everybody wants to stop posting our documents and put them online. But actually, people expect them online now. It's not a case of because they want a cheap rate. It's because clients want a digital experience, and that's from the bottom end of the market, where you're doing cash ISAs in a bank where you just want stuff done, to the right at the very top end, the high net worth individuals. Their expectation is that it's a good, seamless digital journey, and I expect to be able to go online and see some of my wealth there and then.
It always felt to me that financial advice, it feels like hybrid sort of makes more sense at an emotional level. It's a very sensitive subject, isn't it? So in that context, I guess I'd always felt that would consumers be wholly reliant on tech, although they expect tech to be there. Consumers' expectations these days are extraordinary, aren't they? So it makes a lot of sense. To what extent do you think the financial services industry will always keep that foot in the personal space? Because it just feels to me like there are certain subjects that can't cross the line or span as far as digital might go in other sectors. Buying everything online through Tesco's feels like crikey, what supermarket wouldn't offer you that? But what's your gut feel about that in terms of where we are in that evolution?
Well, there are some really interesting points in your life where you probably don't want to do a quick digital experience, isn't it? Certainly if you're about to retire, you're in some cases dealing with the largest amount of money that you've ever had to deal with and make a decision on. You probably don't want to do that in a quick switch. You probably want to have a chat to somebody, wouldn't you? And I think there are various moments, and it's relative for different people, I imagine. So somebody, who's a small inheritance of 50 grand, and probably that's an awful lot of money compared to someone a high net worth, where that might be buttons, and is worrying that it's going over their annual limit or something.
And the other thing I'm interested in terms of your take, given the breadth of expertise. I mean, I know you guys are involved in life and pensions and wealth platform, the whole shebang, really. Do you think the demographics of the audiences in those different sectors have different expectations? I mean, pensions dashboard is one that obviously, keeps coming up. It seems to be a real struggle to get to a point where it has, it can offer something that is going to be as consumable as I believe it needs to be. But is that because that topic, pensions, is a no-go area as much, or perhaps doesn't lend itself as well to digitization? Or any feel around those sectors?
They're all a bit different, aren't they? I mean, so we do a little bit of banking, and banking is a lot easier because everybody's got really used to just banking online. I don't think I now ever ventured to my PC for a bank account transaction. It's pretty much done on my phone. Even my parents are currently moving that way there. But a pension is very different, because a pension is a financial services product that you haven't necessarily interacted with for your entire life. people are still running on a whim and a prayer, hoping that they're stuffing enough away in their pension schemes and they're all merging together and they'll get to the end and survive and be able to retire. Even when they change jobs, that's still a painful process. So those demographics are different to the wealth demographics, the banking there. And then you've got insurance, which is kind of pretty much everybody deals with insurance product on a different level. So very different people across very different things. But, it's still, are you savvy enough to do it digitally? Is a big question, because I'm always surprised the amount of insurance is done through brokers. How they get business, because surely you just got to go pair something together, some kind of meerkat site, and that's how you get insurance. But it's there's still a huge broker industry out there selling motor insurance. It's wild.
And yet you see some of the large organisations, we've seen the aggregators, flourish to a degree, and yet the metrics they seem to associate with that market, is very click-through led. Have you seen more opera singers this month than meerkats, or they've got some new character on there now, some Australian character, But the thing with that, it always feels like it's a quite promiscuous relationship, a transient and promiscuous relationship, where I guess when you're talking about retirement, albeit it's very long periods between when you might engage with it, and auto enrollment's changed it. Do you think things like auto enrollment and the compulsions around contributions and dashboard are going to start to change some of those things? Because is there a real consumer drive for that? Do you think?
People are people, and it's that thing. The retirement space. You're trying to look after a person that you don't know yet, isn't it? I think that's the general. So why you avoid it? People avoid difficult decisions, and a pension was a difficult one. So getting people to engage in it is just really hard work. As much as there'll be a push for, the dashboard so you can see where you are and all that stuff, I can't really see it improving very quickly. Maybe when our younger cohorts, our millennials, are very much used to, a slightly different environment. When they grow up and become the majority, maybe that's when pensions become a thing that they can be spoken about a bit easier.
Yeah, I think interestingly, chatting to a couple of the younger guys in the office here, they seem to be probably more willing to, certainly more willing to engage, technically, if you like, because they're from an app world. But, I think the stats I heard recently, there were several million apps. I think it was 2 or 3 million on Google and 1.5 million or so on Apple. So, it feels to me like it's a quite well populated arena, like the portal arena, which also struggles with lethargy in relation to clients and getting them to engage regularly. As you said yourself, and I'm exactly the same, by the way, I rarely visit my bank on anything other than my mobile phone.
Yeah.
And there are some standouts that are trying to make a difference in the more holistic financial services world. But are there any areas there or particular standouts that you would cite that are starting to see a migration, if you like, an education to bring people more into line with the mobile telephony world that our kids are going to be more receptive to?
Are our clients shifting? Even are any specific client that is shifting?
Well, yeah. Without naming names, but in terms of propositionally, I think one of the sessions you talked about previously was wallets, and that space. And again, that needs to be, in my mind, quite holistic. It needs to be quite all-encompassing before people engage with things, because in the same way as you said about dashboard is about pensions and retirement. There are spots in our lives, times in our lives when that is a pertinent subject, but because it's not relevant often enough, unfortunately, it isn't something that gains sort of daily interactions, and therefore it doesn't sort of resonate. It's not something at the top of people's minds, even though they might be in an auto enrollment scheme and seeing the money come out of their payslip every month. You think there'd be a degree of engagement and interest. But I know in our discussions with some of these firms that are providing very large schemes, even getting their customers to look at their statements to see what they've got in their pension fund, which feels, it is a big ask.
So just to go back on what Altus does, we operate in general insurance. We've got two business verticals, two core business verticals, wealth and general insurance. And I would say approximately 2 to 1, sort of in terms of the amount of business that comes in from those. So generally more wealth than general insurance, that kind of thing. Yeah. Maybe a bit more, but that's it. And as you mentioned, we're in life, pensions, platform moves, the whole shebang. So actually, the front end piece, the sort of the wealth and the advisor space, is only one small part of it for us. Although everybody still needs that front end, don't they, to get in there? It is the front door. So even if we're dealing with a platform, they're cognizant of the fact that they sell through advisors, and advisors need a front door. So the problems vary in that front end space and the advice space. Absolutely, engagement with clients, making an engaging proposition, and there's some really interesting things out there. There's that are trying to capture customer data and use it, so almost sort of a lifetime fact find, so that you've got an app and it gathers information about you as you go through life. And at any point, you've got essentially a fact find ready to go, and you can use that, bolt that on top of information, so you can then start to get integrations into your bank account and your wealth provider. And we've done a reasonable amount of work in Ireland, and that seems to be a bit different over there because it's sort of bank driven. The bank, the bank is still a trusted source of information for a lot of the Irish market. The protection and the current accounts and everything, and they'll go to their AIB or Bank of Ireland for that, and they're more used to that. Whereas we don't have that same relationship with our bank anymore to get that holistic view. So it has to come from, sort of what are they called, personal finance applications, which don't seem to be standard. It's interesting. I parked my car, and there was an American tourist as I parked the car, sort of moaning about going around the UK, having to have 20 different applications, one for each car park that they visited around the UK. Yeah, it seems like that is a similar sort of problem that we're facing as financial services.
I actually saw an article, and it's a really brilliant comparison, actually, because it is annoying. Actually, I think it was in Winchester that some of the older demographic were complaining that they couldn't just stick a coin in a meter and just go, and they have to have a smartphone and install an app, albeit I know, the stats tend to indicate that most people have got one these days. But that banking thing is really interesting because I've always not, particularly because there's a difference with Ireland. It feels so close, doesn't it? As so close to us, and yet there's a difference in habits. Because that's a position of trust that I've never felt, certainly for my own bank, although they're very, very good. That they don't leverage that trust in the way that I would expect them to in provision of services that I probably would be receptive to seeing in one place with my bank. And yet somehow they've not made that transition. Do you think that will come on shore, should we say, to the mainland in due course? I mean, Barclays and all sorts of others have tried to lead on that, haven't they?
Do you not think we had it once, though? Because my parents would have gone to the bank for everything, at some point. And certainly when, in my early career, I had a business account manager, and, he'd go for them for lots of questions. And then it became commoditized. And when he's talking about sort of selling you some insurance that you need for your business, he would then have to pass you on to an insurance department. So it felt like they had it. They commoditized everything to get cost effectiveness out of it, but then they lost the thing that they had to pull everything together and sell to them. And now they're trying to go, right, well, how can we do that? On an app. Whereas maybe they go back to having a person to do it.
Yeah, you're right. And with only a couple of exceptions, I mean, I can think of a couple of people that, are quite innovative in the digital space for very big prolific brands that are actually, in those two cases, exceptional. But actually, the relationship piece largely has disappeared. And again, looking at some of the most recent news with some of the the banks where their branches do still offer advice. But when you go in for advice, you sit at a desk in a room, a quiet room, and you interact with someone remotely that we've all been getting used to and have now got used to because of the pandemic. Well, they're using that as the driver for the economy they can do by centralising everything. So just sort of thinking about that segue into the pandemic and things.
Yeah.
Do you think that the pandemic and that remote working sort of piece has changed the way that businesses know they've got to evolve? Because certainly, for doing this, for instance, originally would have been, I wouldn't have thought to do things this way. Now, every day, my life is spent mostly on Teams. In fact, somehow I seem to ram too much into my diary, but everyone's now beginning to get a little bit better on managing their time and spaces. But I've seen some great examples where IFAs have really embraced that technology to try and keep back to that original conversation, that personalization by having these sort of remote interactions. But do you think that's gonna continue to proliferate? It doesn't feel like, it feels like the pandemic in that context is going to be with us for the long term.
Absolutely, yeah. I still struggle, now when I have to think about going to the office. Pre-pandemic, personally, I was pretty much away 5 days a week, and sometimes for weeks. Not being home, and then you're at home and you get, you become part of your home life again, which is fabulous, and all that, and then you have to manage that, and I think that's the same for everybody. Totally concur with that whole diary thing, but certainly from a consulting perspective, how consulting has changed is amazing, because it's whereas pre-pandemic you might go to a client for a meeting, and that might take you all day, and that's what you would have done in that meeting. You'd prep for it and you write the notes afterwards, everything. That would be your day for that client. Now you'll have deal with probably 4 clients or 4 jobs or 4 meetings in that day. It's highly different, and it's changed in that sense. And as I mentioned earlier, that my expectations have changed from who I deal with and what I deal with. I expect now to be able to have the information to hand digitally to deal with that. Certainly, where we see our clients, that is the expectation there. Certainly the uplift, I don't know, you must have some stats on that, but the uplift in the pandemic from what was it? It was essentially mobile first engagement, not even digital engagement, but mobile first engagement went in one of our clients from 90 to 99%. So it was, they were no longer even going to the PC. They were interacting with that financial provider on their phone in between meetings when they go downstairs for coffee or whatever. You're right, that's going to be with us forever.
Do you think that's changed the definition of what hybrid advice is then as well? Because I may be a bit of an old fuddy-duddy, but this is where I largely lead my life, but I still don't think, there are occasions when, and even in the office, we're very much hybrid. I know you guys are too. And I think you have to do that if you want to keep a good working force and you want to get the right people, you have to offer it. But the best interactions, without any shadow of doubt for me, are those when you're at a whiteboard and you're with people in the room and you read the room and things. So do you think the actual definition of hybrid advice has changed?
Well, I'm not sure what a definition of hybrid advice is.
Or ever was. Yeah.
In the same way, I was never particularly sure what D2C was. And I was definitely not sure what B2B2C was when that popped up in midway through that. And they're different things for different people, but absolutely hybrid is, I want to be able to I want advice in whatever medium. It's almost omni advice, isn't it? I want to go through the process of getting the right product for me. And at some stages I'm going to want some advice, and other stages I'm going to want it digitally. And I want to do it on my terms. Yeah. I think it's the thing, it's the client's terms of engagement, not yours anymore, isn't it?
And choice again. I think you're right. When we talk to, for our, very slim part of our world, if you like, in terms of comms and, communications, we work with some really prolific and large, distributors of print output, because our industry, whilst being digital, is far from it as far as a lot of the content and output is concerned. But that's changing, and there's a definite sway in preferencing and choice where people will, for some things, want to go towards digital, and for others, they probably still want that big pack of wealth information to feel loved by the brand, if you know what I mean. There's all those dynamics in play. So I think it's fascinating. I think if anything, the pandemic's just changed that whole perception and that whole path, really.
I can't remember the name of the advisor, but they publish, it's like once a quarter or something, a magazine called Trust. And there's some really interesting articles in it. And the best thing is it smells of print. It smells of print. It smells like something real. So you've got one extra sense, and it's a winner. They stopped it for a while. I have no idea. I can't remember the name of the advisory group at all, but the magazine's really good. And they stopped it for a while, and they've started it back up again because clearly it was a winner.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think I've read some stats around this in terms of the things that people remember the most. They're the sound and smell. It's funny enough, two of the senses that are most connected with your memory, and therefore, if you felt in a safe place back then when you'd flick through the magazine or maybe the Financial Times, maybe for that demographic, that's coming back to it. But who knows? Circling around a bit back to you in particular. So obviously, this digital space is one that you're passionate about and you've been involved in. But just a couple of more personal things. So I'm reading a couple of your tweets. I understand you're a big cycling fan. And I think a big wine fan. I saw a fabulous picture that you put up. I think where you replaced the water bottle with a bottle of wine. I don't think you're suggesting that's a safe habit to do. So I'm not sure you combine the two. But you've done some huge rides and things. I mean, they're looking at there. Well, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, no. So I've done. I really love. This is what I go out and do. Cycling, and I just like to do the miles, really. So some big ones around Wales, and
the home territory there, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. I love the mountains as much as I'm probably not quite in the shape for it right now, but I get there. And then I'll love sort of going up the big hills. Really, it's a challenge, and it's the switch off that's important to me actually more than anything else. Is that you're fighting the territory and the landscape and that's all you're concentrating on. It's
good on you if you can do it, and with a bottle of wine in there. I mean, that's impressive.
That's the way to do it. It's the only way to do it.
One last thing, if it's okay with you, and I always tend to finish off with this was. Because I think we get some really insightful, pieces, which I'm going to piece together at some point. But if you were to be able to speak to your younger self, not that long ago, obviously, but what would be maybe one or two, but what would be the piece of advice you'd give you really useful?
I had to think about this because I just briefly I put your question, so I thought I'd better think about this one because it's interesting. I think that for me. Every experience that I went through, and I've been through, I've fairly varied past, I would say, from starting my own. So I used to started and ran a digital agency back in '99, sort of early websites and that kind of thing. And then went into financial services. We used to do. I brought an invoice discounting system. So for wages, and we became the 9th largest lender in the UK, and that went to the wall. And so in all those experiences, and then I went to work for Nationwide. And in all that experience, what I would say is that every point that you go through, no matter how hard it is, has a really positive influence on your later life. So the scars really make the later life much easier, I think. So I think I'd go and tell myself to try and to push harder when I was younger, to not be afraid to fail, because the failure is where you're going to win later.
That's really good. That's a really good one, actually. And we've not had one in that sort of vein before, which is really cool. Yeah, learning all the way through your life. I think every meeting I go into and every person I meet, you look at when you think, you learn things, don't you, all the time, and try and soak it up. It's just as you get older, it's the retention rate goes. That's the trouble. But barring that, it's all good. But no, perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the principles is the other thing. You played back this conversation. I'll have forgotten names. So I've got the name of a Spanish island, and I'll forget the name of a platform and all that sort of stuff. But actually, it's the principles you need to remember things. So how to do things, and that's the other thing, I think. Remember the principles and the scars, and you'll be able to win, I think.
you'll use them to get somewhere good in the future. That's really good. Listen, fantastic. Thanks so much for your time. Michael James, thanks for joining us on our podcast. And really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Paul. Cheers. Good to speak to you.
You too.